Wait a minute. Am I hearing this right? You want me to insult you?
Yeah. I'll give you $20 if you do a good job.
$20?
Right.
Look, Mr. Jefferson, keep your $20. This one's on me.
What happens when a hit sitcom runs out of ideas? Instead of a graceful exit, some shows from the 70s and 80s chose chaos. They added new kids, moved across the country, and introduced storylines so bizarre they had to be seen to be believed. Get ready for a trip down memory lane to revisit the shows that should have ended years earlier. These are 13 sitcoms from the 70s and 80s that went on way too long. 1. Happy Days.
Can I have $10 to buy a blouse?
No.
All right, then. Can I have $10 to buy books?
I want a receipt.
I'll get it.
Let's start with The Undisputed King, the show that literally created the term for a series going off the rails. When Happy Days first premiered in 1974, it was a warm, nostalgic look back at the 1950s. It centered on the wholesome Cunningham family, particularly teenager Richie and his friends. But the show had a breakout character, a leather jacket-wearing, motorcycle-riding cool guy named Arthur Fonzarelli, or the Fonz. Truth be told, the Fonz became so popular that the show slowly shifted its focus entirely to him. For the first few seasons, this formula was pure gold. It was one of the biggest shows on television, a cultural phenomenon that defined the 70s. The magic was in its simplicity and charm. You had Richie Cunningham's innocent adventures, Mr. and Mrs. C as the perfect TV parents, and the Fonz as the ultimate symbol of cool who was still part of the family. But after a few years, the well of 50s nostalgia started to run dry. The writers needed new ideas, and that's when things got desperate. The turning point, the one that became a legend of bad television, happened in a Season 5 episode. The cast goes to Hollywood, and to prove he's still brave, the Fonz accepts a dare to water ski over a shark. Yes, a real shark was involved, sort of. It was a ridiculous, cartoonish stunt that had nothing to do with the show's original appeal. It was the moment Happy Days stopped being a relatable family sitcom and became a live-action cartoon starring Fonzie. Believe it or not, the show continued for 6 more seasons after that. Key characters like Richie and his sister Joni left the show. The storylines got even more bizarre. Fonzie became a teacher at the high school, then a dean. The show introduced Joni's boyfriend Chachi, who was basically a mini-Fonz. They even brought in new characters that nobody cared about. It limped along, a shadow of its former self, all because the network couldn't let go of Fonzie's popularity. The final seasons are a tough watch, a clear example of a show that went on for about 5 years too long. The departure of a main character is tough, but what happens when a show loses not one, but 3 of its core cast members and tries to replace them with lookalikes? Our next entry is a masterclass in how not to handle cast changes. 2. Three's Company.
Hello? Janet, what took you so long to answer the phone?
I was getting Cindy out of her wedding gown.
Isn't her husband supposed to do that?
In the late 70s, Three's Company was a ratings juggernaut. The premise was simple and, for the time, a little daring. 2 single women, Janet and Chrissy, need a roommate for their Santa Monica apartment, and they find one in Jack Tripper, a charming culinary student. To get around their grumpy landlord, Mr. Roper, who would never allow a single man to live with 2 single women, they pretend Jack is not interested in ladies. This misunderstanding was the engine for the show's comedy. It was full of slapstick, hilarious mix-ups, and innuendo, all held together by the incredible physical comedy of John Ritter as Jack. The chemistry between Jack, the sensible Janet, and the bubbly Chrissy was perfect. The first crack in the foundation appeared when the original landlords, the Ropers, were given their own spin-off. They were replaced by a new landlord, Mr. Furley, played by the brilliant Don Knotts. The show survived this change, but the next one was a major blow. Suzanne Summers, who played Chrissy, left the show after a contract dispute at the height of its popularity. It was a messy public departure that left a huge hole in the series. The producers decided to replace her with a new ditzy blonde character, Chrissy's clumsy cousin, Cindy. The chemistry just wasn't the same. The show kept going, but it felt like something was missing. Then, after another season, they replaced Cindy with a new roommate, a smart nurse named Terry. At this point, the show was a revolving door of roommates. The plots became more and more repetitive. Every episode seemed to follow the same formula. Someone misunderstands something Jack says or does, they think he's involved in some crazy scheme, and he has to wiggle his way out of it through physical comedy. John Ritter was working overtime to keep the show funny, but the magic was gone. It had become a caricature of itself, running on fumes for its final few seasons. It was a classic case of a show that should have ended when its core trio broke up, but instead it stretched the premise until it snapped. Moving a character out of an apartment is one thing, but our next show took its two main characters and moved them clear across the country, leaving behind everything that made the series a hit in the first place. 3. Laverne and Shirley.
Think he can move that rubber-tree plant? Anyone knows an ant can't move a rubber-tree plant, but he's got what, Laverne?
A hernia.
A spin-off of Happy Days, Laverne and Shirley became a massive hit in its own right. Set in the same 1950s Milwaukee universe, the show followed the lives of two best friends and roommates, Laverne DeFazio and Shirley Feeney. They were working-class girls who bottled beer at the Schatz Brewery, and their lives were a hilarious mix of chasing their dreams, navigating friendships, and getting into wacky situations. The physical comedy between Penny Marshall as Laverne and Cindy Williams as Shirley was legendary. Along with their goofy upstairs neighbors, Lenny and Squiggy, the cast was a perfect comedic ensemble. For its first 5 seasons, it was one of the most watched shows in America. The show was grounded in its Milwaukee setting. The brewery, the apartment, the local diner, it all felt real and relatable. But after 5 seasons, the writers made a baffling decision. In a 2-part episode, Laverne and Shirley lose their brewery jobs and decide, on a whim, to pack up and move to Burbank, California, to try to make it in the movie business. Just like that, the entire premise of the show was gone. The Milwaukee setting, their jobs, their supporting cast of friends and family, all abandoned. Lenny and Squiggy conveniently moved to California too, but the heart of the show had been ripped out. The California seasons were a pale imitation of the original. The girls tried to find work as stunt women, gift wrappers, and other odd jobs. The plots felt forced and silly. Then, things got even worse. Cindy Williams left the show at the beginning of the 8th season, leaving Laverne all by herself. The network tried to keep it going with just Laverne and a cast of new characters, but it was pointless. The show had always been about the friendship between two women. Without Shirley, there was no show. It managed to last for 1 more season, but it was a sad, lonely end for a sitcom that was once the toast of television. It proved that you can't just change a show's entire DNA and expect it to survive. Some shows changed their setting, but our next one stayed in the same ritzy apartment for over a decade. The problem was, it told the same jokes for 11 seasons until it felt like a rerun of itself. 4. The Jeffersons Moving On Up.
Oh, George? Oh, come on, Willis, I'm too tired.
That iconic theme song perfectly captured the spirit of the Jeffersons. A spin-off of the groundbreaking sitcom All in the Family, the show followed George and Louise Jefferson as they moved from a working-class neighborhood in Queens to a deluxe apartment in the sky on Manhattan's East Side. George was a successful, opinionated, and often arrogant owner of a chain of dry-cleaning stores. Louise, or Wheezy as he called her, was his patient, level-headed wife who tried to keep his ego in check. The show was a huge hit, celebrated for its great characters, sharp humor, and for being one of the first shows to feature a successful and affluent black family. For years, the formula worked beautifully. The comedy came from George's clashes with his neighbors, the Willises, an interracial couple, and his constant battles with his sharp-tongued maid, Florence. The chemistry between Sherman Hemsley as George and Isabel Sanford as Louise was fantastic. The show had heart, wit, and a cast of memorable supporting characters. It ran for an incredible 11 seasons, becoming one of the longest-running sitcoms in American history. And truth be told, that was the problem. A show can't run for that long without becoming stale. After 7 or 8 seasons, the Jeffersons had simply run out of stories to tell. The plots became incredibly repetitive. How many times can George get a big head about his money and need to be taught a lesson in humility? How many times can he insult Mr. Willis or trade witty barbs with Florence? The show began to feel like it was on a loop. The character of George, once a complex and funny man, became more of a loud-mouthed caricature. The later seasons lacked the spark and originality of the early years. While it remained popular with its loyal audience, it was clear the creative well had run dry long before the network decided to finally cancel it, without even giving it a proper finale episode. While The Jeffersons grew repetitive, our next sitcom took a darker turn, becoming famous for tackling serious issues in a way that sometimes felt more like a lecture than a comedy. 5. Different Strokes.
Tell me, what do you think of today's market?
I think the price of tomatoes is too high.
The premise of Different Strokes was pure 80s gold. A wealthy white Manhattan widower named Philip Drummond adopts the 2 young black sons of his late housekeeper. The show followed Arnold and Willis Jackson as they adjusted to their new life of privilege, guided by their new father and his teenage daughter, Kimberly. At its heart, it was a sweet show about family, love, and bridging cultural divides. And it gave us one of television's most iconic catchphrases. "What you talking about, Willis?" The show was an instant smash hit, thanks in large part to the undeniable charm of its young star, Gary Coleman. For its first few seasons, Different Strokes was a classic, heartwarming family sitcom. The comedy came from the culture clash and the boys' innocent reactions to their new world. But as the 80s wore on, the show took a sharp turn. It became one of the pioneers of the very special episode. This is where a sitcom stops being funny for a week to teach the audience a lesson about a serious social issue. And Different Strokes tackled them all. There were episodes about substance use, child endangerment, eating disorders, and more. While the intentions were good, the execution was often heavy-handed and awkward, draining the comedy from the series. The show also struggled as its young stars grew up. The cute kid dynamic that made the show a hit was gone. The writers tried to keep things fresh by adding new characters, like a new wife for Mr. Drummond and her son, Sam. Sam was clearly brought in to be the new cute kid, but the magic wasn't there. By the later seasons, the show was a shell of its former self. The plots were getting more outlandish, and the very special episodes were becoming more frequent and preachy. The show had lost the joyful, innocent spirit that made it so beloved in the beginning. It hung on for 8 seasons, but the last few were a sad decline for a show that once had so much heart. Tackling serious issues is one thing, but our next show couldn't even decide who was in its main cast. Changing its lineup so many times, it felt like a completely different series every few years. 6. The Facts of Life.
I know a phony when I see one.
You should. You spend enough time looking in the mirror.
A spin-off of Different Strokes, The Facts of Life started with a huge cast. The show's original premise was that Mrs. Garrett, the Drummonds' housekeeper, takes a new job as the house mother at an all-girls boarding school. The first season featured a large ensemble cast of students, including a young Molly Ringwald. The show was messy and unfocused. So, for Season 2, the producers made a drastic change. They got rid of most of the girls, keeping only 3: the wealthy and beautiful Blair, the funny and plus-sized Natalie, and the gossipy Tootie. They also added a new character, the tough motorcycle-riding Joe. This new, smaller cast was a brilliant move. The chemistry between the 4 girls and Mrs. Garrett was fantastic, and the show became a massive hit. For years, this formula was perfect. We watched the girls grow up, deal with school, friendships, and family, all under the wise guidance of Mrs. Garrett. The show was funny, relatable, and full of heart. But then, the changes started happening again. First, the girls graduated, and the setting moved from the school to a gourmet food shop that they opened together called Edna's Edibles. This new setting was a bit strange, but the core cast was still intact. The real trouble started when Charlotte Rae, who played Mrs. Garrett, decided to leave the show. Losing the central mother figure was a devastating blow. The network replaced her with a new character, Mrs. Garrett's sister, played by Cloris Leachman. It just wasn't the same. Then they added a young boy to the cast, a foster kid named Andy, in an attempt to add some new energy. In the final season, the producers tried to set up a spin-off by introducing 2 new students for Blair to mentor. The show had completely lost its identity. It started as a show about a large group of girls, became a show about 4 specific friends, and ended as a strange mix of characters that didn't quite fit together. After 8 seasons, it was clear the facts of life had become far too complicated. Changing a cast is risky, but what about a show that was so good for so long that people still argue about whether it overstayed its welcome? Our next show lasted far longer than the event it was based on. 7. MASH.
This morning, while the rest of us were selfishly having a cup of coffee, he went off in a helicopter to do some field surgery. He jumped with his plasma, his bag, everything an Army doctor needs, except his parachute.
Let's be clear, MASH is one of the greatest television shows of all time. Set during the Korean War, it followed the doctors and nurses of the 4077 Mobile Army Surgical Hospital. It was brilliant, seamlessly blending laugh-out-loud comedy with heartbreaking drama. It explored the horrors of war and the bonds of friendship in a way no show had ever done before. The cast, led by Alan Alda as the brilliant but cynical surgeon Hawkeye Pierce, was perfect. The show won countless awards and is rightfully considered a masterpiece. But here's the thing. The Korean War lasted for 3 years. MASH was on the air for 11. The show's incredible length is a testament to its quality, but it also created a problem. The show evolved dramatically over its run. It started as a sharp, cynical comedy, much like the movie it was based on. But as the years went on, and especially after major cast changes like the departure of McLean Stevenson as Henry Blake and Wayne Rogers as Trapper John, the show became much more serious. Alan Alda took on a greater creative role, and the episodes started to feel more like weekly dramas with a few jokes sprinkled in, rather than the other way around. Some fans loved this evolution, seeing it as a sign of the show's maturity. But for others, the show lost something essential. The rebellious, anti-authority spirit of the early seasons was replaced with a more preachy, sentimental tone. Hawkeye went from a witty troublemaker to the moral conscience of the show, often delivering long speeches about the futility of war. By the final seasons, some felt the show had become a bit self-important, taking itself too seriously. The finale was a monumental television event, watched by over 100 million people. It was a beautiful and fitting end. But it's hard to argue that a show that ran for 8 years longer than the war it depicted didn't stretch its premise to the absolute limit. MASH evolved, but it kept the same name. Our next sitcom changed so much that it literally had to change its title, becoming a spin-off of itself while still on the air. 8. All in the Family. Archie Bunker's Place.
Are you waiting for a special invitation? I said breakfast is on the table.
I heard you. So did every moose up in Canada.
All in the Family changed television forever. It introduced us to Archie Bunker, the lovable bigot from Queens, and his family, his sweet but simple-minded wife Edith, his progressive daughter Gloria, and her liberal husband Mike, who Archie called Meathead. The show was a cultural earthquake, tackling controversial topics with humor and honesty. The brilliant writing and perfect cast made it the #1 show in America for 5 straight years. It was a show that was both hilarious and important. The classic lineup was lightning in a bottle, but it couldn't last forever. The first sign of trouble came when Gloria and Mike, played by Sally Struthers and Rob Reiner, left the show. They were given their own spin-off, and their absence left a huge void. The writers tried to fill the hole by having Archie and Edith adopt Edith's young niece, Stephanie. The dynamic was completely different and not nearly as compelling. The show was still popular, but it wasn't the same powerhouse it used to be. The biggest change, however, came after the 9th season. The network wanted to keep the show going, but Jean Stapleton, who played Edith, wanted to reduce her role. So they did something unprecedented. They retitled the show Archie Bunker's Place. The new series was set in the neighborhood bar that Archie had purchased. Edith appeared in only a few episodes of the new version before her character passed away off-screen. This new show was a much more somber, less funny affair. It focused on Archie's relationship with Stephanie and the patrons of his bar. While it was still successful for a time, it was a completely different show. It was a long, slow decline from the groundbreaking genius of All in the Family into a more standard, sentimental sitcom that hung on for 4 more seasons. Some shows change their cast, while others are built on a central question that they refuse to answer. Our next sitcom teased a romance for so long that when it finally happened, nobody cared. 9. Who's the Boss?
Sweetheart, there are all kinds of love. There's the way you love your family.
And the way you love your snake.
And the way you love your housekeeper.
The premise of Who's the Boss was a perfect 80s culture clash. Tony Michelli, a retired baseball player and widower from Brooklyn, takes a job as a live-in housekeeper for a high-powered advertising executive and single mother named Angela Bauer in upscale Connecticut. Tony brought his street-smart daughter Samantha, and Angela had her shy, nerdy son, Jonathan. The show was charming, funny, and built on one central question: will Tony and Angela ever get together? The chemistry between Tony Danza and Judith Light was electric, and the will they won't they dynamic was the heart of the show. For the first few seasons, this tension was captivating. Audiences tuned in every week to watch the near misses, the heartfelt conversations, and the slow burn of their romance. The show was a ratings giant. We watched the kids grow up, and the family dynamic between the 4 of them was genuinely heartwarming. Angela's witty and man-hungry mother, Mona, was another highlight, always ready with a sarcastic comment. The problem was, the writers kept teasing the romance for year after year after year. They dragged it out for 7 full seasons. By the time Tony and Angela finally admitted their feelings for each other and became a couple in season 8, the audience was exhausted. The tension that had driven the show for so long was suddenly gone, and the writers didn't seem to know what to do next. The final season was a mess of them trying to navigate their new relationship, breaking up and teasing a reunion. The kids were grown up and mostly off the show. The magic was gone. The show had spent so long building up to the big moment that it had no idea how to exist after it happened. It's a prime example of a show that milked its central premise for every drop, long after it had run dry. Keeping a couple apart for too long is one thing, but what about a show that loses its main character and then tries to pretend everything is fine? Our next sitcom found out the hard way that you can't have a show without its star. 10. Welcome Back, Kotter.
You know what you are? You're bad. Just 'cause my jokes aren't funny and they don't make people laugh. You're bad. You're bad. Bad.
Welcome Back Your dreams were your ticket out. That theme song kicked off one of the hottest sitcoms of the 70s. Welcome Back, Kotter was about Gabe Kotter, a teacher who returns to his old high school in Brooklyn to teach a remedial class of wisecracking underachievers known as the Sweat Hogs. The Sweat Hogs were the heart of the show, a lovable group of characters including the group's leader, Vinnie Barbarino, the official Sweat Hog Freddie Boom Boom Washington, the goofy Arnold Horshack, and the street-smart Juan Epstein. The show was a massive hit, especially with younger audiences, and it turned its young cast, particularly John Travolta as Barbarino, into superstars. The classroom scenes were full of energy, with Kotter trying to connect with his students through humor and understanding. The chemistry between Kotter and the Sweat Hogs was perfect. But the show's massive success became its biggest problem. John Travolta's movie career exploded with hits like Saturday Night Fever and Grease. He was suddenly one of the biggest stars in the world, and he had little time for a weekly sitcom. In the 4th season, his role as Vinnie Barbarino was drastically reduced. He appeared in only a handful of episodes. Losing its biggest star was a huge blow. But then, things got worse. Gabe Kaplan, the star of the show, also got into a contract dispute with the producers, and his role was also cut back. Suddenly, a show called Welcome Back Kotter barely featured Kotter. The focus shifted to the remaining Sweat Hogs and Kotter's wife, Julie. They even tried to introduce a new Sweat Hog named Bo to fill the void, but it didn't work. The 4th and final season was a bizarre, disjointed mess. It was a show that had lost its 2 most important characters and was trying to survive on leftover parts. It was a sad end to a show that had burned so brightly and so quickly. Losing a star is bad, but our next show made a change so strange in its 2nd season that it's still talked about as one of the worst retooling decisions in TV history. 11th, Mork and Mindy.
Oh, well, it's just another side of love, Mork. Like a father's love for his daughter. He sacrifices...
Well, I know that. I read Lolita.
Oh.
Nanu Nanu. When Mork and Mindy premiered, it was an absolute sensation. A spin-off from an episode of Happy Days, the show starred the incomparable Robin Williams as Mork, a quirky alien from the planet Orc who comes to Earth in an egg-shaped spaceship. He befriends a kind young woman named Mindy McConnell, who lets him live in her attic. The show was a perfect vehicle for Robin Williams's manic, improvisational genius. He was a force of nature, and audiences couldn't get enough of his bizarre alien customs and childlike wonder. The show shot to the top of the ratings, making Williams a household name overnight. The 1st season was magical. It was a simple, funny, and sweet show about the friendship between a human and an alien. The plots were often just simple excuses to let Robin Williams be Robin Williams. But at the end of the 1st season, network executives got nervous. They worried that the show's audience was too young and that the novelty would wear off. So, for season 2, they made a series of catastrophic changes. They got rid of several popular supporting characters, including Mindy's dad and grandmother. They tried to shift the focus from the silly comedy to more relevant social satire. They even brought in a new character, a grumpy neighbor named Mr. Bickley, to be a foil for Mork. The result was a disaster. The new tone was awkward and preachy. The show had lost its joyful, chaotic spirit. The ratings plummeted. The executives realized their mistake and tried to undo the damage in season 3, bringing back some of the original charm. But the damage was done. The show limped on for 2 more seasons, even getting so desperate as to have Mork and Mindy get married and have a baby who aged backwards. It was a series of bizarre gimmicks designed to recapture the magic that the network itself had destroyed. It remains a cautionary tale of what happens when executives try to fix something that isn't broken. Getting married is one way to change a show, but our next entry made a change so absurdly out of character in its final season that it retroactively ruined the entire series for many fans. 12. Roseanne.
Oh, I'm right where I belong, living on Failure Street, 2 blocks south of Pathetic. My zip code? All zeros.
For 8 seasons, Roseanne was a groundbreaking and beloved sitcom. It was one of the first shows to portray a realistic, blue-collar American family. The Connors weren't rich or glamorous. They were struggling to pay the bills, raise their kids, and find humor in their everyday lives. Roseanne and Dan Connor were one of the most relatable couples on television, and the show's sharp, honest writing about money, family, and work resonated with millions of viewers. It was funny, smart, and unflinchingly real. It was consistently one of the highest-rated shows on television. The show was a masterclass in long-form storytelling. We watched the kids grow up, saw the family deal with job losses, and shared in their small victories. But then came season 9. In the first episode of the final season, the Connor family wins the state lottery. They win over $100 million. This single plot twist completely destroyed the entire foundation of the show. Suddenly, the family that was famous for being relatable and struggling was unimaginably wealthy. The show abandoned all pretense of realism and became a bizarre fantasy. The final season was surreal. Roseanne imagined herself in spoofs of other movies and TV shows. The family hobnobbed with the rich and famous. The smart, grounded humor was replaced with outlandish, cartoonish scenarios that felt like they belonged on a different show entirely. It was a slap in the face to the fans who had invested in this family's realistic struggles for 8 years. In the series finale, it was revealed that the entire 9th season was just a story Roseanne had written to cope with her life. In reality, Dan had passed away from a heart attack at the end of season 8. This final twist was even more jarring and controversial, leaving a bitter taste for many viewers. It was a classic example of a show that should have ended a year earlier, before a single, terrible idea erased its legacy. Winning the lottery is a wild twist, but our next show relied on a quieter, but just as desperate, move, adding a cute new kid when the original kids were no longer cute. 13. Growing Pains.
Ben, you're supposed to be in bed by 9 o'clock. I was. Nobody said anything about how I'm going to stay there.
Growing Pains was a staple of 80s family television. It centered on the Seaver family. Dr. Jason Seaver moves his psychiatry practice into his home so his wife, Maggie, can go back to her career as a journalist. This left Jason to be the primary caregiver for their 3 kids, the troublemaking but charming Mike, the brainy Carol, and the rambunctious Ben. The show was a hit, offering a wholesome and funny look at suburban family life. The cast had great chemistry, and the storylines were relatable for families across America. For several seasons, the show was a reliable performer. We watched the kids navigate school, dating, and sibling rivalries. The show's popularity even skyrocketed when Kirk Cameron, who played Mike, became a major teen heartthrob. In season 4, the writers added a new baby to the family, Chrissy. This is a classic sitcom move to freshen things up, and it worked for a while. But as the show entered its later years, the original kids were growing up and heading towards college. The Growing Pains premise was starting to fade. The show was clearly running out of steam. So, in its 7th and final season, the producers made a desperate move. They introduced a new character, a homeless teenager named Luke Brower, played by a very young Leonardo DiCaprio. Luke moves in with the Seaver family. This was a classic case of what is sometimes called Cousin Oliver syndrome, bringing in a new, younger character to try to liven up an aging show. While DiCaprio was a talented young actor, the addition felt forced. It was a clear sign that the show's original dynamic was gone, and the writers were grasping at straws. The final season felt tired, a show going through the motions long after its prime.